My name is Iris Navarro. I am 30 years old. And the evening my mother stood at her own birthday dinner and told the room I had left her to strangers was the evening I finally understood that doing the right thing quietly is not the same as having it known. She said it to the table nearest the window, to the 4 women from her reading group who had known her longer than I had been alive. I had just walked through the door. I was 7 minutes early, I had checked, and the room had the specific ambient warmth of a party that had started without me, which I recognized because most of them had. My mother was standing with a glass of sparkling water, her back partly to the entrance, and she was in the middle of a sentence when I came in. "She left me to strangers," my mother said. "I have not seen her in 3 years." My brother Tomas was at the table to her left. He reached over and touched her hand. My Aunt Rosa, who was seated across from him, looked at me with the expression people use when they have already decided what they are seeing and are simply waiting for it to confirm itself. I set my bag on the chair nearest the door. I found the water pitcher on the side table, poured myself a glass, and drank half of it standing where I was. Then I found my seat. I had been assigned the table near the kitchen pass-through, separated from the main arrangement by the width of a catering cart, and I sat down and set the glass on the tablecloth in front of me and looked at it. What none of the 31 people in that room knew was that the care director of the facility where my mother had lived for 3 years and 4 months had been keeping a record. Not the official electronic log, the supplementary paper slips that residents' family members signed when they arrived for visits outside scheduled care hours. Small carbon copy forms, pink and white, 2 inches by 4. My name was on 41 of them. She had kept every one in a folder in her desk drawer because she had developed, over 22 years in residential care management, the habit of keeping things that might one day matter. I did not know she was going to use them that evening. I did not know she was in the building. The party was at the facility's private event room, which residents could reserve for gatherings, and the care director's office was 1 hallway away from where we were all sitting. I found out later that she had heard my mother's voice through the ventilation gap above the connecting door. I found out later that she had opened her desk drawer and taken out the folder before she had decided what to do with it. And I found out, when she walked through the door of the private event room carrying a manila folder, that she had decided to let the room see what was in it. But that is not where this story starts. Where it starts is 3 years and 7 months before the party, in a car on a highway at 11:30 at night, when my mother called to tell me she had fallen. My mother's name is Consuelo. She has gone by Connie for most of her adult life, except among family, where she has always been Consuelo, and in the facility's care records, where she is listed as Consuelo Navarro, date of birth March 14, 1954. She is a woman who has spent her life in the company of people who defer to her, which is not the same as saying she is unkind. She is not unkind. She is a person for whom the architecture of her relationships was established early and maintained with considerable consistency. She at the center, the people around her organized according to how reliably they met her needs. My father had been the primary organizer. He had managed the household, the finances, the scheduling, and the considerable social labor of keeping Consuelo's world running smoothly, and he had done this for 31 years with the practiced invisibility of someone who has decided that being necessary is its own form of being loved. He had died when I was 25 of a cardiac event that gave no warning in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. I had driven 4 hours to get to the hospital. My mother had been there already, and she had looked at me when I walked in with the expression of someone whose primary support structure has just been removed, which it had, and which I had understood in that moment as the beginning of a new set of responsibilities. Tomas, my brother, is 4 years older than me and lives in a different city, a fact he has never precisely explained and has never needed to, because the city is far enough away to make regular involvement logistically difficult and near enough to make the absence look like a choice. He had called our mother every Sunday since our father died. He had visited 3 times in the intervening years, at Christmas and at her 65th birthday, and at a point when she had been unwell and the call from the facility had sounded serious enough to warrant a flight. He was, in the family's working account, the one who stayed in touch. The question of who drove 40 minutes each way every Saturday for 3 years was not a question anyone in the family had been asking because the person who did it had not been raising it. The fall had happened on a Thursday in November. My mother had been standing on a step stool in her kitchen, reaching for something on a high shelf. The specific item was a ceramic casserole dish she had not used in 2 years and had no immediate plan to use, and the step stool had shifted, and she had come down on her right side and landed hard on the tile floor. She had lain there for 3 hours before she managed to reach her phone, which had fallen near enough to her hand to be retrievable. She had called me first, not Tomas, which told me something about the hour she had spent lying on the floor before she reached for it. I had been asleep. The call came at 11:17. I had answered on the second ring, dressed in 4 minutes, and been on the highway by 11:30. The hospital was 42 miles from my apartment. I had arrived at 12:49, had found my mother in the emergency bay with a fractured hip and a blood pressure reading that had the attending physician, Dr. Renata Ochoa, watching her closely, and had spent the next 6 hours sitting in the chair beside the bed while my mother moved in and out of the pain medication's first hours. Dr. Ochoa had been direct and thorough. The hip would require surgical repair, which was scheduled for the following morning. The recovery would be 8 to 12 weeks, with a 6-week minimum at a rehabilitation facility before any return to independent living could be assessed. She had handed me a printed summary of the next steps and had said, with the particular efficiency of a physician who has delivered this information many times, that the family should begin thinking about longer-term arrangements. I had called Tomas at 6 in the morning. He had said he would try to come for the surgery. He had not come for the surgery. The surgical repair had gone well, according to Dr. Ochoa's follow-up assessment. The rehabilitation had been more complicated. My mother was a person who did not naturally take direction about her own body, and the physical therapists at the Riverside Rehabilitation Center had found her a challenging patient. The lead therapist, a calm and precise woman named Josephine Tarrant, had called me 3 times during the 6 weeks to discuss my mother's compliance with the prescribed exercise protocol. I had driven to the facility on each of those occasions and had sat with my mother and had translated Dr. Ochoa's instructions into the language my mother was willing to receive them in, which was the language of someone explaining to Consuelo Navarro why something was in her best interest. I had become fluent in this language over the previous 5 years. It was not a natural fluency. It was an acquired one. After the rehabilitation stay, the assessment had been clear. My mother could not return to the 2-story house where she had lived for 30 years. The stairs were the problem, not just the ones she had fallen on, but all of them, and the general configuration of a house that had been built for a family and was now housing one person who had just fractured her hip. Dr. Ochoa had referred us to a social worker named Patricia Sung, who specialized in elder care transitions and who had a list of facilities she trusted and a manner that made difficult conversations navigable. My mother had not wanted to move. This is the part of the story that requires patience to tell accurately, because my mother's resistance to the move was real and the reasons for it were real. The house was where she had raised her children, where my father had lived, where her life had the specific texture of 30 years of accumulated presence, and none of that made it safe for her to stay in. I had spent 4 weeks navigating this with her. 3 conversations with Patricia Sung, 2 follow-up appointments with Dr. Ochoa to review the functional assessment results, 1 very long Sunday afternoon in the house itself, going room by room, establishing what was manageable and what was not. My mother had signed the admission paperwork for Maplecroft Senior Living on a Wednesday in March, 14 weeks after the fall. The facility was 40 minutes from my apartment. I had chosen this as a criterion, quietly and without mentioning it to anyone, because I had already understood that I was going to be the person making the 40-minute drive. Maplecroft was a well-run facility. The care director, a methodical and observant woman named Gwen Aldrich, had been managing residential care for 22 years and ran the facility with the particular combination of institutional precision and personal attention that makes the difference between a place people tolerate and a place people come to consider home. She had met my mother on the intake day and had conducted the initial care assessment herself, which I later learned she did for every new resident, a practice that was not required and that she maintained because she believed in having a direct baseline. I had been present at the intake assessment. I had answered the questions my mother glossed over or misremembered: the medication history, the fall circumstances, the rehab compliance issues, with the accuracy that my mother's own account lacked. Gwen Aldrich had looked at me once, during that assessment, with expression of someone filing information they expect to need later. I had not thought much about it at the time. I had started visiting the following Saturday. The visit had lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. My mother had shown me her room, which she had been arranging since the previous Tuesday with the organizational intensity she brought to anything that was hers to control. She had told me where the hand cream was that she needed, the specific brand, the unscented one. She had told me what she wanted me to bring the following week. I had written it down in the Notes app on my phone, under a contact labeled with her name, and I had driven home and looked at the list before I went to sleep. The list had grown over the 3 years that followed. The hand cream. The brand of tea she could not find at the facility's small supply store. A specific style of crossword puzzle book with a grid size she found comfortable. The reading glasses she kept losing and replacing. Batteries for the small radio she kept by her bed. The raspberry preserves, the particular kind, from the grocery store on the east side of the city. Books from the library, specific titles, requested by name. The cards for the birthdays and anniversaries she wanted to acknowledge, but could not purchase for herself. The list had never been shorter than 4 items and was often 7 or 8. I had also managed, in addition to the weekly supply runs, a set of administrative responsibilities that had accrued over time without being formally assigned. I coordinated my mother's quarterly care plan reviews, which required scheduling calls with Gwen Aldrich and the facility's nursing staff. I managed the paperwork for her supplemental insurance coverage, which had a specific renewal window each year and required documentation I organized and submitted on her behalf. I maintained a running medication schedule, printed, laminated, updated quarterly as Dr. Ochoa adjusted her prescriptions, which I kept in my mother's room, taped to the inside of her cabinet door, and updated in person each time anything changed. I handled the interactions with the facility's financial coordinator, a careful man named Bernard Ito, whenever billing questions arose or coverage documentation needed to be filed. I attended, by phone when I could not be present, the annual family meetings the facility held for each residence care team. None of this had been asked for in a single conversation. It had accumulated in the way that work accumulates when one person is present and reliable and the people who could share it are not nearby and have not been asked. Tomas had called our mother every Sunday. I had driven 40 minutes each way, every Saturday, for 3 years. I had not kept a running total of the hours. I had not needed to. The list in my phone told me what I needed to know about how the time had been spent. The medication schedule was how I found out about the other narrative. I had updated the schedule in February, 8 months before the birthday party, when Dr. Ochoa adjusted 2 of my mother's prescriptions at her annual review. I had printed the new version at home, had it laminated at the copy shop on my lunch break, and had driven to Maplecroft on the following Saturday to replace the old one. When I arrived, my mother had a visitor, one of the reading group women, a sharp and attentive person named Helen, who had been my mother's closest friend at the facility for 2 years. I had met Helen several times. She was pleasant, asked sensible questions, and had the particular quality of attention of someone who takes people seriously as subjects rather than as social furniture. On this Saturday, Helen had looked at me when I came in with an expression that contained, beneath its surface pleasantness, something more searching. We had talked for 20 minutes while I replaced the medication schedule and reorganized the supply drawer. When my mother stepped out to use the bathroom, Helen had said, quietly and without preamble, "Your mother talks about you, you know. She says she misses you." I had said I was there every Saturday. Helen had looked at me with an expression I did not fully understand at the time. "Yes," she had said. "I know." I had thought about that exchange for the rest of the drive home. I had thought about the particular quality of Helen's "I know," not an affirmation, not a comfort, something more careful. I had not yet understood what she was telling me. I had understood it at the next reading group meeting, which I had not attended but which my mother had described to me on the following Wednesday call. My mother had mentioned, in the course of describing the meeting, that she had told the group she had not had any visitors lately. She said it with the natural ease of someone reporting an ordinary fact. I had sat with the phone against my ear and said nothing for a moment. Then I had said, "Mom, I was there last Saturday." "Oh, you came by for a bit," she had said. "That's different." I had ended the call, after another 10 minutes of ordinary conversation, and had sat in my kitchen with the phone on the table in front of me. I had opened the Notes app and looked at the list. I had thought about the medication schedule in my mother's cabinet, with its quarterly updates and dated signatures, each new version signed by me and by the facility nurse who verified the change. I had thought about the 41 Saturdays. I had thought about what it means when the thing you have been doing and the story being told about you have no relationship to each other. I had not called Gwen Aldrich that night. I had not called anyone. I had gone to bed and slept poorly and gone to work the next morning and done my job with the same attention I always brought to it, because that is what I do when I do not yet know what to do. What I did over the following 8 months was continue visiting. I visited every Saturday. I brought the things on the list. I updated the medication schedule when it changed. I attended the care plan review in April by phone, asked my questions, took my notes. I said nothing to my mother about the reading group conversation or the Wednesday call or the particular quality of Helen's I know. I was waiting to understand the full shape of the thing before I decided what to do about it. The birthday party was scheduled for October. My mother turned 70. Maplecroft's private event room held 40 guests comfortably, and my mother had invited 31. I had received my invitation by mail 3 weeks before the event, in an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting with a card inside that said she hoped I could make it. I had written the date in my calendar. I had bought a gift. I had left work 30 minutes early to make the drive in time. Gwen Aldrich walked through the door of the private event room at 4:47 in the afternoon, 17 minutes into the party, carrying a manila folder. She was not in her work clothes. She had been leaving for the day when she heard my mother's voice through the ventilation gap above the door connecting the event hallway to the administrative corridor. She was wearing a dark coat over a gray blouse, and she had her car keys in her left hand. She had taken the folder from her desk drawer with her right hand on the way out, which she told me later was not a plan so much as a decision that made itself while her hand was already in motion. She stopped inside the door. The room had the particular quiet of 31 people who have all noticed something at the same time. Tomas had his hand on my mother's arm. My Aunt Rosa had turned in her chair. Helen, who was seated near the window, had her hands in her lap and was looking at the floor. Gwen Aldrich held up the folder. She did not raise her voice. "I've been care director at Maplecroft for 11 years, she said. When family members visit outside scheduled care hours, they sign a supplementary slip. The slips go in a folder." She opened the folder and held it so the room could see the stack of papers inside. "This is Iris Navarro's folder. There are 41 slips in it. The oldest is dated 3 years and 4 months ago. The most recent is dated last Saturday." She looked at the table where my mother was standing. "Every one of them is signed." She closed the folder and set it on the table nearest the door, the one where I had left my bag. Then she said, to no one in particular, "I'll leave this here." And she walked back out through the door she had come in through, and the door closed behind her, and the room stayed quiet for what felt like a very long time. My mother was looking at the folder. Tomas had taken his hand off her arm. Rosa was looking at the table. I picked up my water glass and took a drink and set it down again. After a moment, my mother sat down. The party continued for another 40 minutes. These things do. The music that had been playing resumed. The catering staff moved through the room with dessert plates. The guests found their way back to their conversations with the careful efficiency of people who have collectively decided to give a difficult moment somewhere to go. Helen came to my table at some point during those 40 minutes. She sat down without asking and said, in the same quiet voice she had used in my mother's room in February, "I should have told you sooner. I knew it had been going on for a while." "You told me what you could," I said. "I told you something carefully coded, so I didn't have to say it directly." She paused. "That wasn't enough. It was something," I said. She looked at her hands. "Your mother is not a bad person," she said. "She misses your father. She misses the house. She has a way of making the absence of things into a story that makes sense to her." "I know," I said. "And you just kept coming anyway." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual thing to do." I did not answer. I did not have an answer that was both accurate and brief, so I let the statement sit between us where it was. Tomas came to the table after Helen left. He stood rather than sat, which told me the conversation would be short. He said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. I should have asked. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? It was a better question than I had expected. Nothing right now, I said. But I want to talk when there's time. A real conversation about what the last 3 years have actually looked like. He nodded once. He said he would call. He went back to the table where my mother was sitting. My mother and I spoke at the end of the party, when most of the guests had gone, and the catering staff was moving through the room collecting plates. She came to my table and sat across from me, and she looked at the folder Gwen Aldrich had left, which was still sitting where it had been placed, and then she looked at me. I don't know why I do that, she said. It was not an apology, not quite. It was something closer to an account, a sentence that named a pattern without pretending to explain it, which was more honest than most things she had said to me in the last 3 years. I know you don't, I said. I think you miss him. I think you miss the house. I think you have a way of making the missing into a story about someone else's absence, because that's easier to hold than what it actually is. She was quiet. Her hands were on the table, folded, the way they always were when she was taking something in. I miss him too, I said. And I've been coming here every Saturday for 3 years because this is where you are. That's the whole reason. She looked at the folder again. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were dry. She is not a person who cries in company, but there was something in her face that was different from the face she had been wearing when I walked in, something that had the quality of a position given up rather than a posture changed. I know, she said. I know you have. We sat for a few more minutes. Then I helped her carry the flower arrangements from the event room to her room, because she had asked if she could keep them, and they were too many to carry alone. We made 2 trips. On the second trip, I set the last arrangement on her table by the window, next to the framed photograph of my father, and my mother stood for a moment looking at it, and I stood beside her, and neither of us said anything. Gwen Aldrich was in her office when I stopped by on my way out. The light was on. She had not left after all. I knocked on the open door. She looked up from her desk. I wanted to thank you, I said. She set down her pen. I've been watching you come in every Saturday for 3 years, she said. I've been watching your mother tell a different story in the common room on Tuesday afternoons. A pause. At some point those 2 things have to be in the same room. You took a risk, I said. Not much of one. She picked up her pen again. The folder has 41 slips in it. Signed. Dated. Initialed by the front desk staff on 26 of them. She looked at me. That's not a risk. That's a record. I thanked her and drove home. Tomas called on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the party. The conversation lasted an hour and 23 minutes, which I know because I looked at the call log afterward. We talked about the 3 years. We talked about our father, and about the particular way his absence had reorganized the family structure, and about how each of us had responded to that reorganization. Tomas by maintaining distance at a safe frequency, me by filling the space that opened up when he moved away, both of us doing what our previous experience of the family had trained us to do. Neither of us had chosen this consciously. That was the part that required the most patience to say accurately. He said he would visit more often. I said I believed him, which I did, in the provisional way you believe a thing that has not yet been demonstrated, and that depends on circumstances that remain to be seen. I told him what I needed was not more visits from him, or not only that, but a different accounting between us of what the last 3 years had required, and who had provided it. He said that was fair. We talked about what that accounting might look like in practice, which is a different and more difficult conversation than agreeing that one is needed, and we did not finish it in one call. My mother and I established a new rhythm in the months after the party. The Wednesday calls continued. The Saturday visits continued. What changed was a quality of acknowledgement, nothing declared, nothing formal, but a different texture in how she received my presence. She began telling the reading group, according to Helen, that I came every Saturday. She began mentioning my visits in the Wednesday calls in the way you mention things that are simply true. She stopped performing the missing in my direction because the folder had made that particular performance unavailable. I still have the medication schedule in my bag, the current one, updated in January when Dr. Ochoa adjusted one of her prescriptions again. It is laminated, as they always are, with the date in the lower right corner and my signature and the nurse's initials on the verification line. I will replace the one in my mother's cabinet with it on Saturday. I have been replacing it on the relevant Saturdays for 3 years. This is one more. The care director kept the folder. I asked her about it once, several months after the party, and she said she had moved it from her desk drawer to the filing cabinet under my mother's resident record. She said she kept records on all her residents' family situations and that mine had simply required a different kind of documentation than most. She said it with the matter-of-fact quality of someone explaining a professional practice, not a personal favor. I understood it as both. What I have thought about most in the time since the party is not the moment when Aldrich walked through the door with the folder, though I have thought about that too. What I've thought about most is the 41st Saturday, the one the week before the party, when I had driven 40 minutes and brought the list of things and signed the slip and spent 2 hours with my mother, who had told me she was looking forward to the party and showed me the table arrangement she had approved and described the menu the facility's kitchen was preparing. I had driven home that Saturday knowing the party was in 7 days and that I would be there, and I had not known, and had no way of knowing, that my mother had been telling the reading group for months that I had not come. I keep thinking about the 41st Saturday not because it was different from the others, but because it was not. I showed up. I signed the slip. I spent 2 hours with my mother. I drove home. I did this because it was the right thing to do, and because she was my mother, and because the 40 minutes each way was a distance I was capable of covering, and so I covered it. I did not do it to build a record. I did not do it because I expected it to be seen. I did it because it was the next Saturday, and the one before it had been a Saturday too. The record exists because the Saturdays existed. The Saturdays existed because showing up is the thing you do when it is what is needed, whether or not anyone is keeping count. Someone was keeping count. That was not something I had arranged or anticipated. It was simply what happens sometimes when you do the same thing 41 times in a row in a building where someone has been watching and has a folder in her desk drawer. Presence, done consistently enough, leaves a record whether or not you intend it to. At the party, Gwen Aldrich made a choice. She heard something through a door, walked to a drawer, and decided. She told me afterward she had not planned it. Was there a moment in this story where you would have made a different choice than I did? On any of the 41 Saturdays, or at the party itself, or in the conversation with my mother at the end of the night? Subscribe for a new story every week. If you stayed until the end, like and hit the bell. It genuinely helps.